Drew's going to be reading our text for the day. I'm going to hold this away from me so I don't. So we're going to be in Hebrews chapter 12. Hebrews chapter 12. So everybody turn over there, scroll over there, swap over there, however your flavor of Bible is. Go ahead and do that. And I'm going to listen for pages turning. Then we'll do that thing we do, you know. Still see some people turning. And we'll wait just a second. Feel free to use the table of contents when needed. Hebrews is at the back of the Bible. So if you go all the way to Revelation and then hang a left, you just go a couple books and you'll find it. For those of you who are struggling with that, that's okay. Listen, your pastor, sometimes I'm like, where is that book again? And I'm like, I don't even. So it happens. All right, if you're there, say word. Let's get into the word so the word can get into us.
Hebrews chapter 12, verse 11 through 17. No discipline seems enjoyable at the time, but painful. Later on, however, it yields the peaceful fruit of righteousness to those who have been trained by it. Therefore, strengthen your tired hands and weakened knees, and make straight paths for your feet, so that what is lame may not be dislocated, but healed instead. Pursue peace with everyone and holiness. Without it, no one will see the Lord. Make sure that no one falls short of the grace of God, and that no root of bitterness springs up, causing trouble and defiling many. And make sure that there isn't any immoral or irreverent person like Esau, who sold his birthright in exchange for a single meal. For you know that later, when he wanted to inherit the blessing, he was rejected, even though he sought it with tears, because he didn't find any opportunity for repentance. This is the word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God. Thank you, Drew. Wonderful job. I could listen to you read for hours, I think. I enjoy that. Take that. Don't put that up here. Don't leave that to me. It was the 6th of May, 1954, and a guy by the name of Roger Bannister had trained his entire life to that point, and he was striving to be the fastest runner of the mile in recorded history. And on that day, he runs the first ever recorded sub 4-minute mile. And we all said, what? That's insane, because it is. If you ever ran a mile, that's crazy fast. And, imagine how pumped you would be if you were, like you'd worked hard. I mean, all of us have worked hard for something, right? And, well, hopefully you have, and accomplished it like this. And only a month, a little over 30 days later, a guy by the name, his last name was Landy, beats his time by a second, 1.4 seconds. Two sub 4-minute miles. And so what they decide to do is later that year in August, they decide to meet together and they're going to race. They're going to hit this mile and see who is the fastest. And so they meet and they begin the race to see who can run the fastest mile, who's the fastest man on earth as it pertains to the mile run. And they begin the race, and Landy gets out to an early lead, and he leads the entire race. And as he's approaching the finish line, coming around the last turn of the track, he's thinking to himself, I haven't seen Bannister yet. And so he takes a second and he just glances back. And at that moment, Bannister passes him and beats him in the mile. Later, he's interviewed, and I want to read exactly what he says about this. He told Time Magazine later, "If I hadn't looked back, I would have won. Now I have to live in that moment of regret the rest of my life." That moment of regret. I want to give you the title. It's on the screen. A Bowl of Stew and a Life of Regret. If you're familiar with a bowl of stew, you may know where this is heading, but we've already read the text. that shines light on this person, Esau. Regret. Here's what regret is. Regret is sorrow aroused by circumstances beyond one's control or power to repair. It's to mourn the loss or death of fill in the blank. I don't pretend to think that I'm the only one, as I often say here. I don't know if you're like me, but I have this sneaky suspicion that you are a whole lot more like me than you may even like to think. And what I do know about my own life is I have a whole slew of regrets. Anybody else? That's rhetorical. You don't have to raise your hand, but maybe you can. Feel free. Christian leader and sociologist Tony Campolo did an interview with 50 people who are 95 years of age and older. And he asked them, what's your biggest regrets in life? What would you have done differently in life if you could have done something? The top two responses was, we would take more time to reflect on the meaning of life. I find that very interesting. That at the end of these people's 95 and older, they said, you know what? If I could go back, I would have took more time to think about the meaning of life. What was meaningful? What was actually meaningful? And the other was, I would have taken more risk. There's a great book out there, a end-of-life caregiver. She compiled all of the stories of her 30-year career of taking care of people in their last and final days. And ultimately, she generally broke it down to these things that people wished they had or hadn't, right? I wished I had the courage to live a life true to myself, not to the life that others expected of me. I wish I had, listen to this one, I wish I hadn't worked so hard. That was one of the primary ones. I wish I had the courage to express my feelings. I wish I had stayed in touch with my friends. I wish I had let myself be happier. The idea here is we all have regrets. And in this text that we just read, it jumps back and is recalling a story from Genesis chapter 25 about this man named Esau who sold his birthright in exchange for a single meal. For you know that later when he wanted to inherit the blessing, he was rejected even though he sought it with tears. You ever been so regretful about something? You wanted to go back and get what was lost so much that it brought you to tears. And yet, it was past. It was gone. Here's the thing. The reason the author here in Hebrews is bringing this up is because exactly what he says. We should work together with one another. We should, the way he says it, make sure be at peace with everyone and holiness. Without no one will see the Lord. Make sure that no one falls short of the grace of God. This doesn't mean that we're over here like dropping the hammer on one another. That's not what it is. It's that we should live in a community of love, that we encourage one another not to fall into the trap of Esau, the life of regret. And that's what I want to attempt to do this morning. I want all of us to understand that here's what we are called to be. We are to work together along with the Holy Spirit so that none of us are people of regret like Esau. None of us are that. Because the truth is, sorry, no take-backs. Right? For Esau, there was no take-backs on this. No take-backsies. All right? In the words of kids. And the reality is the past is history, and we only have today in which we can live. So here's what I want to do today. 3 things, and I'm going to do it as quick as I can. I want to talk about what causes regret. I want to talk about how to avoid regret, and then the one that we're all longing for, I want to talk about how to live after regret. What causes regret? It's the I wish I had, right? You got any of those? I wish I had in your life. I wish I had done this or done that or said this or said that or went to this or went to that or been present, whatever that looks like. Early in John F. Kennedy's presidential campaign, he met with Billy Graham. And Billy Graham shares this story about how he was able to ride in the car with JFK, and they were just discussing some different things, and JFK directly asked Billy Graham, "Billy, do you believe in the second coming of Christ?" And Billy Graham, as if you know anything about Billy Graham, he was like, "Absolutely, I believe the second coming of Christ, and it is imminent. It's coming. It's coming." But as they neared their destination, they weren't able to finish this conversation. And being the place that JFK was in, he didn't have a whole lot of time, and so they had to separate. But before they left, JFK said to Billy Graham, he said, "I want to continue this conversation at a later date. I want to talk more about this." After he was elected in 1963 at the National Prayer Breakfast, Billy Graham got to meet up with JFK again. And he actually got the ride, was offered to ride in the car with JFK back to the White House from the National Prayer Breakfast. And JFK specifically said, "I want to continue that conversation." And here's what Billy Graham said to him. He said, "President, I've been battling the flu all week. I've been battling the flu all week. And the last thing you need is to come down with the flu with all the responsibilities and everything that you have going on." And Billy Graham decided not to ride in the car with him and finish that conversation. And only a couple of weeks later, JFK was assassinated. And here's what Billy Graham says in his biography. He says, "My hesitation at the door and that request, it still haunts me. What was on his mind? Should I have gone with him? It was a moment that I could never bring back." The "I wish I hads." We all have these, and where do they come from? I think, at least in part, not jumping to a lack of certainty. Not jumping to a lack of certainty. It's this idea of fear. And we can play this out. We've all had these situations that we can, no, it wasn't with JFK, the President of the United States, but we've probably all had these moments where we had an opportunity to say something. We kind of even felt a push to say something. I would call that the leading of the Spirit. Or these moments in our lives where we had this, and just out of fear, what will be said, or this or that, circumstances come up and we don't jump. Anybody? Anybody? I am here to encourage you. You don't, listen, you read biographies about men and women who have done great things. What they will tell you is that when they made the decision that pushed them over, and it was like that catalyst moment in their life, the last thing that they had was 100% certainty. They were just as much questioning whether it was going to work out good or not. It was what they would say, probably not in these words, but what they describe is it's a step of faith. It's a step of faith. I just went for it. And when I came to, let's not be people like Esau. Let's be people who go for it. We don't want to be saying, "I wish I had," when we lay on our deathbed. The second thing is not continuing due to a lack of appropriate commitment. Sometimes I wish I had continued in that. I wish I would have continued in finishing my education, or continuing that workout program, or that diet, or whatever. I wish I had, and the list goes on and on and on and on, right? Fill in the blank. And oftentimes it's just due to a lack of appropriate commitment. You know, and here's what's wild about this, and I'm gonna breeze past this. I'm not gonna hang out here because I just don't feel like I need to. But here's what I know about our modern culture is we don't have an issue with not committing. We have an issue with overcommitment. And y'all hear me bang this drum all the time. We're so busy in life, and I'm guilty. Listen, chief of among sinners right here. We're so busy. We don't even have, that's the reason I put appropriate commitment, because we don't even have time to appropriate which commitments should be there often. We're so busy, it's just on to the next thing, right? And we're just surviving. We're really not living. And I would just draw you back to the sermon I preached 2 weeks ago about margin. A little dose of margin and watch life come alive again. So you got to slow down and you got to stop. If you want to appropriate your commitments and get appropriate commitments in your life and figure out what those are, you're just going to have to get some margins. That's the I wish I hads, but we all have those I wish I had nots, right? Right? For Esau, it was a lack of impulse control. I'm tired. My stomach wants food. I don't care about no birthright. Just let me get this bowl of stew now. Right? You ever been there? You ever been there where you're like, you know what? This is not going to be a good thing later, but I'm going to live for the now. I want to satisfy said stomach hunger, whatever that looks like, fill in the blank there. I have a lack of impulse control. It's a short-term gratification over long-term good. And I hope all of us are sensible enough to say, when we do that, it's never good. However, how many of us have functioned in that in our lives? Lack of impulse control. You know? You know what? I don't even care. I have 2 cover-up tattoos because of my own lack of impulse control when I was 18 years old, and I got these ridiculous tattoos, and then I had to do something with them. So it's chief among sinners in the room, okay? Lack of impulse control. I wish I hadn't done that. I wish I had not, right? The other thing is very much tied to the previous one, a lack of importance prioritization, right? It's the same thing as the one before. The appropriate commitments, we're not prioritizing the proper thing. And so we like, what's important in this moment is what's in this moment. And here's the deal. Don't think for a second, you're like, that you don't have a hierarchical structure of priorities. Whether you've done that intentionally or unintentionally, you got them. Amen? All of us know that. And if you've not done it intentionally, it's unintentional. And I'll just tell you, unintentional priorities are rarely properly ordered in a hierarchical structure for your life. Could we agree on that? This takes intentionality, which leads me into, okay, that's what causes regret. This leads me into how to avoid regret. I want to give us 3 guardrails real quick that can set up in our life. The first one is encouraging accountability, and it's in the text. He says, make sure that no one falls short. Well, who's he talking to here? He's talking to a community of people. And I put encouraging because here's the thing. So often when we think about accountability, this is what we have in our mind. We got this person we're like, the Bible thumper is like just waiting on somebody to miss the mark, and that's your accountability group. I don't know if you've ever had an accountability group, but I once had one where we were like memorizing Bible verses, and like every week we would come in and we would quote the memorized Bible verse, and if you come in without the verse memorized, boy, it was shame on you, and eventually it just fizzled out because nobody wanted to come and be shamed because it's like, I'm with Jesus wept again. I know it's the 3rd week, but I mean, that's my Bible verse for the week, you know? And it's like, shame. And that's not what biblical accountability looks like. That's not what it is, man. It's encouraging. It's coming alongside one another and saying, hey, how are things? Like, I want to encourage you, press in. It doesn't mean it doesn't challenge you. Yes, we should be challenged. However, it should be encouraging. That accountability should be encouraging. And this is actually part of the warning that's going on here. He says, like, be careful because if this root of bitterness springs up, it can cause trouble, defiling many. One author goes on, he says, how powerful a warning this is. Many who mean well fall away from truth and stop running the course because of the influence of bitter attitudes of others. On the other hand, the person himself, dropping the side of the race of the course, may himself become sour grapes. This attitude on his part may pollute many. There is danger here. how often those who fall or fail in their own lives, listen, denounce the whole process as if it were not worth doing. They become bitter and resentful of those who are succeeding. So they find fault. They take pot shots at the church and in general, and at individuals in it particular. They are able to find fault. Why? Because if you look closely enough, you'll discover faults in everyone. But by this fault finding this type of fault finding grows out of resentment towards others, and it can destroy a congregation or a community. Anybody seen this? There's no shortage of bashing the church today. And here's the truth. Your pastor stands up here as one. Like, you want to find fault? Come look. Just spend like 2 days with me. You'll find some faults, okay? If that's what you're seeking, in accountability, if we're seeking to find faults in others, you're gonna find it. You're gonna find it. This is not the goal of accountability. The goal is to encourage one another, to spur and push one another on towards good things, righteous things. What if we became that? Accountability is less about finding faults and it's more about spurring one another on in righteousness. That's the first thing. Do you have some sort of encouraging accountability in your life? The second thing is realignment. In the military, they teach us about this thing called OODA loop. It's a leadership principle. But I want to tell you real quick the history behind that. It was first originated with pilots. And OODA loop just means it was originally ODA. Observe, decide, and act. Observe, decide, and act. Observe, decide, and act. And this was for pilots in the first planes, okay? But then what they began to realize was once you started injecting in jet engines into airplanes, things moved a lot faster. And for pilots, it wasn't good enough for them just to observe, because they could observe their surroundings and be 100% certain of where they were and fly straight into the ground, and it was happening. And so what they did was they added another O, orient. So now it's observe, orient, decide, act. Why? Because this is the idea of realignment or reorient your life. Because when life is moving so fast, when a plane's moving so fast, you have to orient yourself to your surroundings. It's not just good enough to observe. You have to orient yourself. You have to observe and then place yourself rightly within what you're observing. You have to realign. Different seasons call for different commitments and different things, right? Different things in our lives. Different seasons have different kicks and commits. That's the next thing. We have to constantly kick and commit things in our life. Some things that were good in a past season need to be kicked. They're not helpful in the new season. They're not helpful in this season, right? Some things that we weren't doing in a previous season, and that was a good thing, they are necessities in the season that is at hand. We have to orient ourselves. We got to OODA loop that thing. All of my OTS officers are going to be so happy right now that I said OODA loop in a sermon. That's what, if any time you had a question in training, they're like, OODA loop it, man. I'm like, that's not helpful. I know OODA loop. Okay, anyway, sorry. Realignment, kick, and commit. This is how you avoid regret. Do you have encouraging accountability? Are you consistently looking in different seasons of your life? Are you realigning and then kicking and committing to the things that need to happen? When I talk about kick and commit, what I'm talking about here is, here's the thing. I know this is like a common like word, whatever, trigger, but I think it's helpful. Triggers that lead to regretful actions. What are triggers for you? Like, you know the regretful actions that you have a tendency towards, yes? These are the ones that you most frequently fall into, these actions. And you know that there are certain triggers that like bring that on, that make that much easier. Those are the things in this season you need to kick. The triggers that lead to regretful actions. And there's also triggers that lead to life-giving actions. So you need to commit to those. Not just the action, but the action that leads to the action. What if we got that intentional about our lives? I think things would be different. So what causes regret? The I wish I hads and the wish I had nots. How to avoid regret, encouraging accountability, realignment, and kick and commit. And the last thing I think that all of us are like wanting to some degree is how to live after regret. How to live after regret. Because the reality is the damage is done. It's too late, isn't it? For Esau and his story, it didn't matter how many tears he cried. There was no getting the birthright and the blessing back. That specific birthright, that specific blessing was gone. Here's what we have to do. We have to accept that. In life, there are some things that there's no going back to. There's no getting that thing back. The damage is done. Peter Lange, in his commentary, said, for Esau, these were fruitless tears, tears shed too late and therefore in vain. They're of no avail to change the purpose of others and have no power to modify the lot which a person has previously chosen for himself. That's harsh, isn't it? But it's true. You have those things in your life, don't you? They're gone. And there's no getting them back. Let me say it this way. It's never going to be like it could have been or was. Ecclesiastes chapter 3 says, there is an occasion for everything, and a time for every activity under heaven, a time to give birth and a time to die, a time to plant, a time to uproot, a time to kill and a time to heal, a time to tear down and a time to build, a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to mourn and a time to dance, a time to throw stones and a time to gather stones, time to embrace and time to avoid embracing, a time to search and a time to count as lost, a time to keep and a time to throw away, a time to tear and a time to sow, a time to be silent and a time to speak, a time to love and a time to hate, a time for war and a time for peace. I want to be clear here and rightly divide this word. Some would teach that what this is talking about is salvation. I do not in any way, shape, form, or fashion believe that to be true. One, because in Hebrews chapter 11, you see that God blesses Esau. So all those who develop that interpretation of this as if Esau did not have salvation through faith in Yahweh, they didn't read chapter 11, which precedes chapter 12, and you should always do that. So, what he is saying here, however, is that what Esau lost was something that God wanted to do in his sanctification, in his growth, in his walk as a Christian, as a follower of Yahweh for his day and age. And the truth is, y'all, listen to me. Some of us, me included, decisions that we've made in the past, God may have had some sort of plan and we deviated from that plan and now that thing is gone. That can't happen anymore for you. It's just true. Some of you, you're in your second marriage. The first marriage, it's gone. We have to accept that. If you never accept that, you can never live fully in what God is, the relationship that He's got you in now. Is it what God originally intended? No. But we have to accept it. The warning here is not against losing one's salvation, but against falling behind the movement of a divine grace which meets and stirs the progress of a Christian. It's to neglect such a great salvation that you have. And none of us want to neglect. Christ went to unbelievable lengths to save us. We don't want to neglect that, do we? We don't want to live with regret. You can't get it back. You did it. It was done to you. There's no going back. That's the interesting thing about Esau's story. We're not, when you actually go back to Genesis 25 and you read it, it's like, did Esau do it or did his brother do it? And most times in life, the regrets that we have, other people are involved and intertwined into that. And it's something that we did and something that was done to us all at the same weird time. But the reality is you can't get it back. And here's what happens. Esau gets in a place of regret, and regret sets in. And he begins to have a life driven by regret, and what it leads to is anger. He actually wants, it says that he seeks for an opportunity after mourning for his father to kill his brother, and his brother has to run. It led to an anger and murderous heart. Here's what I'm telling you, when regret, no matter what type of regret it is, when it begins to set in the depths of your whole heart, what it stirs up in you is a heart of anger. A heart of anger, which is in direct contrast to the mission of God in the world. It's International Harvester Month. We're talking about God's mission to bring the way of Jesus to every neighbor and nation. And if you have regret running your heart, there's no place for the purpose of God. Let me rephrase that, because that was probably an extreme way to say it. There's less room for the mission of God in your heart. And you let it go too long, it can take over you. So, here's what I'm saying. Right now, it sounds like, oh man, I've lost it. You have. But here's the thing. This is what forgiveness is all about. How do I live? What does life after regret look like? Forgiveness that Jesus offered. Jesus paid the price for each one of us. He took on all of our regrets on the cross. Jesus took them and he said, listen, just receive it. Accept that that's gone. Receive my forgiveness. And this is actually what this text is getting at. That if we walk with one another in such a way where we put each other in an encouraging check, okay, accountability, and we talk to one another about a life of regret, and how not to lead it, and how it seems that regret might be rooting in each of our hearts in some way, what we can begin to do is move away from that and truly experience the forgiveness that is offered to us. Jesus said, I came to give you life to the full, not just a little bit of life or some life sprinkled in. No, life overflowing. And a life of regret is not one that's overflowing with gratitude and love towards others, which is to say, it's not one on mission or purpose of God. Amen? That's true. So we have to receive this, right? And this is what the author's getting at. I love how Eugene Peterson says it when he paraphrases it. In his paraphrase, he says, at the time, discipline isn't much fun, right? Nobody likes discipline in the moment. That's so true. It always feels like it's going against the grain. Later, of course, it pays off big time, for it's the well-trained who finds themselves mature in their relationship with God. So don't sit around on your hands. No more dragging your feet. Clear the path for long-distance runners, so no one will trip and fall, so no one will step in a hole or sprain an ankle. Help each other out. Run for it together. Work at getting along with each other and with God. Otherwise, you'll never get so much as a glimpse of God. Make sure no one gets left out of God's generosity. Keep a sharp eye out for the weeds of bitter discontent. A thistle or two gone to seed can ruin a whole garden in no time. Watch out for the Esau syndrome, trading away God's lifelong gift in order to satisfy a short-term appetite. You well know how Esau later regretted that impulsive act and wanted God's blessing, but by then it was too late. Tears or no tears, right? It's receiving this discipline. This is how we live. We receive the forgiveness. We accept what happened and what's gone, and we receive the forgiveness. The Bible talks about the third thing is to die with Christ and live with Christ. Like Paul talks about this. Like I died. He says, I died with Christ. The old man, it died. All those things, they're gone. Like he had a whole plan of being a Pharisee and rocking and rolling, being the guy, and that died. That died. That whole thing, it's gone. No more. Can't get it back. Can't get it back. He accepted that. He received the forgiveness. And so that with the goal was so that he could live. What is done, either by you or to you. It's dead with Christ. Let it be dead. Hear me. Let it be dead. Like Landy running. If he wouldn't have looked back, he would have won. Stop looking back. Hear me. It's dead. No matter what you did or what was done to you, it's dead. And I'm not minimizing it. I'm just saying that Christ says that he surpasses all of that. He's greater than that. As tragic and as hard as some things of regret can be, Jesus is more powerful than that. His grace is better. It abounds, as the Bible would say. It's gone. Let it be gone by the grace of God and move on by the grace of God. Amen? It's gone. Let it be gone by the grace of God and move on by the grace of God. Let me tell you a story. In Jeremiah, Jeremiah talks about going through a market. The prophet's walking through a market and he looks and he sees a man who is a potter, and he has this wheel and he's making a clay pot. And he's fashioning, he's got his hands on it, and he's actively shaping this pot, this clay. And as he's doing it, it begins to crack. And Jeremiah, the prophet, stares in amazement, expecting him just to take the clay and discard it to the side and pick up a new batch of clay and begin to make a new pot. But what he witnesses is the potter just smushes it down, adds some water, and begins to refashion that clay into a new pot. Is it ever going to be the pot that it was going to be? No. But we serve a potter who, no matter what cracks happen, no matter what regrets happen, he can fashion and shape and do more than anything you would ever ask, think, or imagine to ask for. Yeah, some things are gone. Let them die, because there is a way of living where life is on the forefront and you can see it and move towards it. But every time you keep looking back in regret, we're not accepting the forgiveness, and we're not letting those things die with Christ so that we can live with Christ. And here's what I believe. Regret is a tool of the enemy to remove our heart for mission. We're talking about missions. And the mission that God and the purpose that God has placed you on this earth. When there is regret, the enemy it's a tool in our hearts. If he can get regret in there, he can begin to press out the very purpose and mission that God has placed on your life. Why? Because our actions always eventually follow our hearts. And if regret has your heart, regret will have your life. Let me say it this way. When we live with regret, we can't live with purpose. When we live with regret, we can't live with purpose. So as Josh and the band comes, here's what I want. I want us to think in this moment, prayerfully. This is prayerful response. Prayerful response during this time. What are the I wish I hads and the wish I had nots in my life? When it comes to how to avoid regret, this encouraging accountability, this realignment, this kick and commit, which of those do I not have? Which is not present in my life? Many of us, because we live in a culture of individualism, I would say encouraging accountability is probably top of the list here. And out of fear or out of past experiences, we have not stepped into community that is actually encouraging us. Because I just be frank with you, some communities don't encourage, they do just bash. And that's not our heart here, and that's not what we're about. that don't mean your boy won't challenge you. But challenging and love are not opposed to one another. Encouragement and challenging one another are not. It's actually, I'm just going to say it, it's actually encouraging when someone challenges you. Because what they're saying to you is that I know you're better than that. I know that you're not reaching your potential. I see your capacity. I see your competency. And I want to push you into that. I want you to take the ceiling off your life that you've got, break that thing down so you can burst through it and begin to step into the life that Christ has for you. But that ceiling right now is the death in you. You ain't let it die. You ain't let it die. Let it die. Let it die, let it die, let it shrivel up and die. What's that from? The Lorax. That's what's up. JoJo wore a shirt with the Loraxes. We got to speak for the trees. She did that on Dr. Seuss Day at school Thursday. Anyway, sorry, squirrel. Here's the truth. When we have regret in our heart, it's really hard to live with the purpose that Christ has called us. So what is it? Ways to avoid regret. What causes regret. Things you need to think about. And this time I want you to pray